Good evening, friends, and welcome to Mister Nightspook. Before we go any further, I'd love for you to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always picture these stories stretching across the map. Some of you listening in bright kitchens at dawn, others curled in bed at midnight, and a few of you driving lonely highways with nothing but your headlights for company. It's a strange comfort knowing these tales connect us no matter where or when they find you. Tonight's video takes us beneath the floorboards of Texas, into the basements where light rarely lingers and silence feels too alive. These are true stories of people who discovered something waiting in the dark, footsteps that had no owner, voices repeating what was never said, and rooms that remembered more than they should. Basements are supposed to be places for storage for forgotten boxes and old machines, but in these Texas stories, what's stored is fear itself. So settle in, keep a light nearby, and let's begin. I didn't buy the house for the basement. I didn't even know it had one. The listing said 1918 Craftsman with modern updates, which in Dallas speak means original windows that whistle in March and a kitchen somebody attacked with a catalog. There was crown molding where the ceiling sagged, a sink that could bathe a Labrador, and a narrow driveway that scraped the passenger side mirror if I breathed wrong. It was February when I signed, gray sky and a leftover chill that smelled like wet iron. The realtor, cheerful, relentless, kept saying charm like a nervous tick, as if charm could keep termites from remembering the address. I found the basement the second night, after the movers had gone and the neighbors had introduced themselves with the subtlety of a yard sale. There was a door behind the pantry shelves painted the same off-white, with a knob that didn't match the others. It had been painted closed, a crust of old enamel gluing it to the jamb. The first twist of the knob flaked paint into my hand like dandruff. Behind it, narrow steps angled down where I wouldn't have expected, under the foundation, past the smell of drywall and into something older. The air that came up at me had the damp museum breath of concrete and metal. My phone flashlight showed me a low room with walls that looked poured by hand, puckered and pitted, ground damp in patches where a little black fungus made lace. Pipes ran along the joists, sweating, and in the far corner was a shape that ate the light. A big horizontal chest freezer, the kind that lives in grandparents' garages, its enamel gone to a scabbed rust. A chain circled the lid twice. The chain was old, but the padlock was not. A brass master lock squatted like a new tooth in an old mouth. I stood there a long time feeling stupid about the feeling I had. It wasn't curiosity exactly. Curiosity is bright. This was the feeling you get passing a parked car with the engine running and no one in it, or a shirt hung on a hanger that seems to be a person until it isn't. The silence down there had weight. I could hear my own breathing rebound off the floor. I could hear a slow drip somewhere in the plumbing. The chain bits occasionally settled and made a tiny noise like teeth. I didn't touch the freezer that night. Back upstairs, I arranged plates in the cupboard and regretted buying the house alone. When the wind came up, the windows made a thin, stretched sound. Sometime after midnight, when the lights dipped because Dallas does that in old neighborhoods, I heard something under the floor. It was not loud. A single knock, then a rattle. That metallic shiver like a lid tested from the inside. I was halfway to the pantry door before I stopped. I told myself I'd imagined it. The way you tell a story in your head you don't want to repeat out loud. The next morning, while I was pretending to be the sort of person who jogs, I met the woman from 2 doors down. She had a face that had done a lot of pleasant work in a school office, and she kept her dog on a leash like the law was a pact. When she heard my address, a little pause snagged her sentence. "Oh," she said softly. "You bought Mr. Keller's." I asked who that was, and she shrugged the way people do when they don't want to unpack a suitcase. "He passed 2 summers ago," she said. "Never did get rid of his meat." "His meat?" "Always joked about it," she said, but didn't smile. "We all have our little quirks." She told me many things that sounded like nothing. He'd kept to himself. He'd worked nights. He'd been polite enough to wave. Then her dog tugged and she had an excuse to keep walking. By lunchtime, the story had repeated itself through 2 more neighbors, modified like a rumor does. He'd run a barbecue business from home. He'd hunted deer maybe or hogs and butchered on his own. He'd kept a freezer like nobody's business, which I discovered was Dallas for "we won't ask, and you shouldn't tell." In the afternoon, I drove to a big box store and bought a bolt cutter because I am a grown man, and I didn't move to Dallas to be the caretaker of a chain. I also bought bleach and heavy gloves because the word meat had stuck in my head with little hooks. The cashier asked if I was doing a project, and I said, spring cleaning, like it was a joke I could step out of. I didn't go down there until dusk. The last light lay across the living room like a piece of gold fabric. In the pantry, the door to the basement looked like a throat. I told myself that if there was rot or a smell or something awful, it would be better to find it now, with the city still outside and people walking dogs and the power still humbling on. My phone flashlight made a cone in the dust. The bolt cutter was heavy and awkward, and when I set it down, the click it made sounded like it belonged to someone else. Up close, the freezer looked wrong. The rust patterned in a scab that had been scraped and repainted and scraped again, and in the scratches I could see, what, initials? Numbers. The chain was looped tight, twice around the lid and through the side handles, and the master lock still gleamed bright, as if it had been bought last week. The cord for the freezer was there, sure, but cut 2 inches from the housing. Whatever Mr. Keller had done, he'd unplugged it with prejudice. "I'm going to open you," I said, to make the decision real. My voice came back flat against the concrete. I set the bolt cutter jaws around the shackle. The first bite slipped, and the chain bumped the lid with a little hollow sound. The second bite met metal and didn't give. I leaned in, feeling dumb in my own skin. On the third try, I felt the shackle dent and then pop, and the lock fell with a sound that seemed too loud for the room. The chain sagged. There was a smell. Not the sweet, unmistakable slap of rot. This was colder and thinner, old metal and a ghost of something like pennies in a pocket. The lid, when I set my fingers under it, was cold to the touch. Not cool from concrete. Cold. I opened it 1 inch, maybe 2. Something inside shifted, slow and soft, like a bag of frozen peas exhaling. I dropped the lid without meaning to. The bang rang against the ducts. I stood there with my fingers smarting and my chest tight, waiting for the rational thing that would explain the irrational noise. From inside the freezer, something tapped the interior skin twice. Not hard, not a demand, just a test. Like knuckles on a door. I am not brave in a way that looks good on film. I backed up the steps with the bolt cutter in one hand and the chain dangling like a guilty ribbon in the other. I closed the basement door and leaned my weight on it as if whatever was downstairs had a habit of learning doorknobs. The house had gone very quiet. In that quiet, I could hear the compressor sound. The vibration you only notice when it stops, except the cord was cut and the thing wasn't plugged in. I slept badly. Sometime after 2, a storm rolled across the city like furniture being dragged. The lights browned, then came back, then browned again. I lay awake, listening for the sound I could pretend wasn't real. And when I heard the rattle, the thin shiver of lid against chain that wasn't there anymore, I understood something simple and cruel. The lock hadn't been to keep me out. It had been to keep something in. The next day I called the realtor. I used words like undisclosed fixture and health hazard, hoping there was a policy that would take the decision away from me. She apologized with the stamina of a professional and said the sale was as is. I called the city. They told me about bulk trash pickup. I didn't want the city guys to lift the lid first. I didn't want anyone to lift it. I wanted to be the kind of person who didn't believe in tapping from the inside. That afternoon, a man named Ortiz came to look at the wiring. He was small and patient and had the hands of somebody who solved problems 1 attentive inch at a time. I told him about a mystery hum. He found nothing in the panel that would explain a freezer with a cut cord acting like a living thing. When he walked past the pantry door, he paused, like dogs do when they hear a frequency we can't. "You got a bad transformer on the line, maybe," he said. "Sometimes you hear it in the metal." I nodded because an explanation, even a wrong one, is a handhold. That evening, Ada, the woman from 2 doors down, brought over a pie. It was the kind of neighborliness you read about and assume is fiction until it stands on your porch with foil and a real smile. We ate slices at the makeshift table and I told her a little about finding the freezer. Her face changed the way the sky does before a storm. "Don't open it," she said, "too fast. Then close it," she said, and her hands made fists on the tablecloth. "Listen, I don't like to gossip, but we had incidents. Cats missing, garbage cans pulled down like a person had gone through them, little bones left where you shouldn't leave them." Keller started making jokes about his meat. I told my husband that wasn't a joke, and he told me some men just have a dark sense of humor. but he never hauled anything to the curb. Not once. We sat with that. The wind pressed a palm against the windows. Somewhere a siren stitched the air. She asked if I had a church, and I told her I didn't. Maybe borrow somebody else's for a day, she said, and she wasn't smiling. I slept with the pantry door chair braced like an old movie. At 3:07, my phone made sure I saw the numbers. The power hiccuped again. The house exhaled. From below, the freezer answered with a low, sustained hum that felt as if it came up through the studs into the mattress. Then a new sound. A skittery, intimate noise. Nails? No, fingertips, tapping, rapid and impatient, tracing the seam of the lid, running the length of it as if looking for the place where an old lock had kissed the metal. I went down in the morning with duct tape and the chain, because reason fails but ritual persists. I wrapped the lid from hinge to handle. Ugly silver belts that looked ridiculous beside the stubborn brass of the broken lock. I fed the chain back through the handles and tied it off with a knot that would only hold me, not it. But doing it stole back enough courage to breathe. The day felt long and weightless. I found myself checking the pantry door the way you check a sleeping child, too often gently as if you might wake what you fear. I washed dishes that didn't need washing. I took long, pointless notes about light fixtures. When the sun slid down, I turned on every lamp like a man warding off wolves with candles. Another storm. Another blink in the grid. The hum rose under me like a chorus I wasn't invited to sing. Then, clear as the sound of your name in a crowded room, a voice from below, muffled by metal and chain and the deliberate thickness of the world. Hey, just that. Soft. As if embarrassed. A man's voice, blurred into the pitch everyone uses when they mean no harm. I froze on the kitchen tile, dish towel in my hands like a flag of surrender. The voice didn't come again. Instead, the tapping, 3 slow knocks, a pause long enough to count. 3 more, the old rhythm you don't want to recognize. SOS my brain provided because brains are unhelpful librarians. I didn't answer. I went upstairs and lay on the bed with my shoes on and the house humming steady around me. And I understood that I had made a decision when I'd retied the chain. Not to solve, to contain. In the morning, the duct tape had bubbled with frost. I touched the silver skin and felt cold pull heat out of my fingers. A smear of moisture had crawled down the side and dried into a tidy line, the way blood makes a clean edge when it's been taught patience. In the grime on the lid, something had traced the arc of a hand from hinge to corner, leaving an arc like a crescent. A week passed like that. I became an expert in doing laundry at odd hours because the sound of the washer let me lie to myself. Ada asked once, too casually, how I was settling in, and I told her about paint colors and nothing else. I started sleeping on the couch. The basement door stayed closed, then locked, then hauled in a moment of superstition, with a length of rope to the island, so that if anything came up, it would have to drag a piece of furniture like a prisoner. On Friday, near dawn, the power didn't blink. It died. The neighborhood went to black and the world got loud with rain. Without the small ticking of electricity through my walls, I heard everything else. Water working in gutters, tree branches sweeping the roof, the steady interior pulse of my own blood. And beneath it, the hum, the basement had lit itself. A dull, impossible glow. Not bright, nothing easy like that. A red that lived in the seams. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched the line of light where the freezer's lid met its mouth. A thin, steady ember. The chain trembled, not from something pulling, but from something breathing. I went down 2 steps. 4. The air was colder by layers, like descending toward weather. The red deepened with each foot, the way numbers in a dream become more themselves the more you look. I stood close enough to touch and I didn't. The lid didn't knock. The voice didn't ask. The house held very still. The storm passed. The power returned with a staggered cheer from the street, neighbors reclaiming the ordinary. The hum cut off like a sentence ending. In the sudden silence, a last sound from inside, barely there, so light that I might have imagined it if not for the way the hair on my forearms rose. A breath. A relieved human sigh. I didn't open it. I wrapped new tape. I bought a new lock and locked the chain that can't keep anything but me. I have learned where to step in the living room so the boards don't tell on me. When people ask how the house is, I say charming, and we both pretend that word can do more work than it's meant to. Some nights the lights flicker and sometimes they don't. The tapping comes and goes. Now and then the voice says a word I can't make out, and I answer by not answering, by carrying on, by setting a plate in the cupboard with ordinary care. Ada waves when she walks the dog. I wave back and we don't discuss meat or men or what the city takes and what it forgets. On Sundays, I wake before the sun and listen to the basement breathe until the day puts enough light in the kitchen to make coffee. When I stand at the pantry door and rest my hand on the knob, the cold comes through like a conversation pressed to a wall. I imagine ripping it all out, concrete pipe history, the clean violence of a new foundation. Instead, I tie the rope again. I live over it. I let the past press up to the present like a face to glass, and when the hum rises at 3:07 and the lid gives a single patient rattle, I say quietly, to the thing inside or to myself, by now there isn't much difference. We're not opening today. From below, after a long silence, a whisper answers in a tone I recognize from the man I used to be when I promised myself I'd change tomorrow. That's what he said. The cheap place on Salina Street looked better at dusk. The cedar outside the duplex put its shadow across the cracked walk and made the cigarette burns on the front step look like freckles instead of rot. I told myself it was fine, that I'd keep it till finals, that the rent was so low there had to be a reason, but maybe, for once, the reason was luck. I was 21, taking night classes at ACC and working mornings at a coffee place near campus, and everything about my life depended on not counting too long. Don't count the days overdue on the electric. Don't count the half-punched loyalty cards jammed in the tip jar like confetti. Don't count the way the duplex leaned when buses groaned past on Airport Boulevard. It stood, and I stood, and that was enough. The landlord, a thin man with the last name P on the lease and a habit of answering questions with shrugging advice, showed me the basement like it was a bonus. "Laundry's down there," he said, jingling keys. "It can smell kind of like pennies when it rains. Don't worry." The door opened on concrete steps that dropped into a dim square of a room with pipes riding the ceiling like ribs. A single bulb hung on a pull chain. The washer and dryer were older than me, squat as appliances in a museum. And in the back corner, half under a pile of dusty moving blankets, sat an old radio the color of clotted cream, a boxy thing with a rotary dial and a cloth speaker grill like a mouth trying not to grin. "You get the left side," the landlord said. "Right side's Mrs. Gonzalez. She's quiet as a quilt. You'll hardly hear a peep." The first week was a soft routine. Early shift at the cafe, breakfast tacos, burnt fingers, milk foam on my coat. Then afternoon classes, then back home by 9 with a tub from HEB and the kind of tired that makes the mouth forget to form words. Austin in late September has a heat that goes sly at night. It lifts off the pavement in breaths and comes down the stairs with you. The basement kept the day inside it, and the laundry machines thumped like a heartbeat. I made peace with the radio. It was pretty the way old things can be, with rounded corners and a heavy knob for volume. And the cord ran into a little metal junction box bolted into the cinder block. Once I joked to my friend Lexi on the phone that some old man probably sat down here in the 50s listening to the Longhorns and drinking Pearl beer, and the air still remembered it. It's easier to breathe in someone else's nostalgia than your own life. The drip began on a Tuesday, and it wasn't water. It was a sound like static condensing. I had thrown my scrubs into the dryer after 10 and was heading back upstairs when the radio let out a single hiccup of noise. I froze on the steps, one hand on the doorframe. The light was off. The plug looked the same. I told myself it was the dryer scolding its belt. But the next night, just after 3 in the morning, I woke with the sense of being called by my old name. The one my grandmother used. Long syllables turned into sugar. Except no one had said it. The duplex was quiet as the inside of a sleeping person. And then from under my floor a whisper like a match being struck and snuffed at the same time. I got up. It was 3:07 when I checked my phone. I padded barefoot through the living room, keeping my weight to the edges of the board so they wouldn't complain, and eased open the basement door. The stairwell breathed cool air up at me, the kind of night-cooled warmth that smells faintly of clay. I pulled the chain on the bulb and stepped down. The radio was alive. The little orange pilot light behind the dial's glass had waked up and set a pond-colored glow over the face. The speaker hummed. I was close enough to touch it when I heard voices. Not a song, not the up and down of a DJ. Whispered conversation as if someone had thumbed the volume down on an argument and kept talking anyway. I could hear the shape of words, and then the shape turned towards me. "She's up," said a man's voice, soft with the kind of authority that makes you want to apologize. "She always drinks water in the kitchen first, watch." I didn't move. I didn't run for the sink. I stood there with my mouth drying out and the edges of my vision quietly blooming with static of their own, and the radio waited with me. Someone else chuckled, the sound so close it seemed like it came out of the dryer vent. "Later than Sunday," said the second voice. "Sunday she got up at 3:03. I reached for the volume with 2 fingers like touching the lid of something that might bite. The knob wouldn't turn. The plastic felt slick with a film of basement on it. I could hear them breathing now. A third voice, a woman, said my name, not the short version I used at work. The long one only my mother used when she wanted me to listen. It came out of that cloth grill with a softness that turned my knees to strings. I unplugged it. The cord came away from the wall with a small complaint, and all the lights went out except the orange behind the dial. The hum dropped into silence so absolute my ears rang. "Turn the light off," said the woman's voice, as mild and bored as a teacher. "She hates the dark," said the first man. They weren't joking. I left the radio there, glowing like a coal in a dead fireplace, and went back upstairs slowly so my hands wouldn't shake when the key found the lock. Morning was ridiculous. Sun through blinds, the angle of it in late September feeling like a hand on my shoulder. I laughed out loud when I saw my own face in the bathroom mirror. I drank water in the kitchen and thought about how I hadn't drunk water the night before. How they had expected something from me I didn't give, and how childish it felt to be a person inside her house thinking about a box downstairs as if it were a person too. At work, I told Lexi, and Lexi smiled with her mouth and not her eyes. "Creepy," she said. "But old electronics do that. They pick up like waves. Conduit waves. Airplane bands. A friend of my cousin used to hear pilots in her baby monitor." "You can hear pilots in your baby monitor if you live near the airport," I said. "I don't think this is that. Tell your landlord. You always forget to tell people when things happen to you." I did. I sent a text. "The radio in the basement works? Can it be removed? It's making noise at night." His response came while I was on my break. "It's hardwired for signal boost. Some people like it." "The old lady next door? She used to listen when storms hit. If it's bothering you, just unplug it." I told him I had. That night I set an alarm for 3:05 and pretended to sleep before it. Pretending is its own prayer. It makes you feel like you're part of the normal group even when you're alone. I watched the minute hand slide. Tried to slow my own breath, tried not to make the bed squeak when I turned over. A siren moaned somewhere on Lamar and faded away. When my alarm buzzed, I sat up, already listening. A full minute passed, then 2. The house clicked and settled. At 3:07, on the mark like a bus stopping where it's supposed to, the first sigh of static rose. I was on my feet when the voices came. "She's wearing the shirt with the coffee stain," said the woman. "She keeps that one for sleep. She thinks the upstairs neighbor is the problem," said the second man, amused. "She will make coffee at 9:06. She will text Lexi at 9:10. I kept my phone in the dark of my hand and did not text anyone. I was so quiet I could hear the motor in the refrigerator turning like a small lost thing. The basement door was colder than the hallway. I put my ear against it. The voices didn't get louder. They stayed level, as if the sound came not from the basement but from the idea of the basement. I went down. I took the stairs like I was walking into a church service late, hand trailing the painted block, wishing the steps made less noise. The radio glowed. It was brighter tonight. The pilot light a coin of sun trapped in glass. "She's brave tonight," said the woman. "Her hands are shaking even when she isn't moving them." "What do you want?" I asked, and my voice cracked like a tire over gravel. "That is not the question you ask, but it was the one I had." The others scattered. Nobody answered. The whispering turned into a rhythm like someone reading, and I only understood it when I caught my name again, followed by small facts. The exact brand of my shampoo, the place at the back of my scalp where the hair whirls wrong, the way I look at the latch on the basement door before I go to work as if I don't trust it to stay. "She puts her keys in the freezer when she's stressed," said the second man, delighted. Like a child hiding treasure, I ran up the stairs. That night I slept in the living room on the sofa with a baseball bat tucked along the cushions. and I put a chair under the front door handle because I had seen that in movies. At 4, the voices stopped like someone shutting a book, and I fell into a sleep that tasted like metal. The next afternoon, I caught Mrs. Gonzalez on the stoop as she came back from church. She wore a dress with bright flowers and had a small cross at her throat. And when I asked her how long she'd lived there, she said, "Forever," and laughed, then added 27 years, like it was shorter than I was implying. I asked her about the radio. "You hear it," she said, as if I'd pointed out a weather vane ordinary and useless. "Old Mr. P ran the wires under the floor in 1960-something. The old woman before you used to go sit by it when the rain came. She said the voices told her to move the towels. They tell you to do things?" "No," I said. "They tell me what I already do." "There's worse," she said. "When my husband got sick, I thought maybe it would tell me how to make him better. It only told me when he would cough. Useless. Did anyone else before me complain? People don't stay. Students." She eyed my coffee-stained shirt and the keys in my open palm. "You will go too." I called the landlord again. He didn't pick up. I left a longer message and then a longer text. Thumb-jerking. That night, the voices were waiting at 307 with the tone of a couple about to pick up a discussion they had paused for dinner. "She wants to move," said the woman. "She'll check rents at 9 and cry and not tell her mother." They were right. I sat on the edge of the sofa and tried to remember how cities don't pay attention to you either way. You can scream from the middle of a crowd and all anyone will say afterward is they thought you were laughing. I recorded the radio. I set up my phone on a stack of textbooks with the mic pointed at the speaker and the camera facing nothing. The file in the morning was 24 minutes long. I put in my headphones at the cafe before we opened and listened to my house talk to me. The voices came thin through the phone and fuzzed out when the dryer rattled. The woman said my name and then the voices said things I'd thought and never said. The feel of the uneven tile in the shower under my arch. The way I counted the steps between the bus stop and my door when I was nervous. The fact that when I woke at 1:50 I always checked the oven knob. And I didn't begin worrying about that until after my father died. At the end of the recording there was a noise that wasn't a voice. 3 slow taps, as if someone was patient on the other side of the wall. I showed it to Lexi. She pulled one earbud out and looked at me the way people look at dogs when dogs are thinking about running. "Someone wired that thing to a bug," she said. "Or it's a prank." "You have a roommate?" "No, just the woman next door." "Then someone is in your crawl space." "Don't look at me like that. We had a guy hiding in our walls back home for 2 months. You know that story." "If someone were in the crawl space," I said, with the calm clearness of a person telling herself the rules of physics, "I would hear them." And where did they learn my grandmother's voice? We went back that afternoon with a toolbox borrowed from the cafe's back room and a stubbornness that was 90% Lexi. The junction box on the wall was old, but not ancient, its screws bright. We pried the cover off. Inside, neatly stapled wires went up into the joists and vanished in the direction of my bed. I stared at the hole they slipped through. It was the size of a thumb and lined with the gray of old wood, and cool air drifted from it like a quiet opinion. The radio sat behind us, faithful as furniture. "Cut it," Lexi said. "Right there. You cut it." She rolled her eyes and reached in with needle-nose pliers. When metal touched metal, there was a snap and the bulb overhead winked and we jumped like we'd both been shot at. And then it was over. The wires came apart with a small sigh. The pilot light behind the radio's dial went out. The basement became only a room. Lexi looked triumphant. Problem solved. That night I didn't set an alarm. I promised myself I wouldn't listen. At 3:07 the radio was dead, and I knew it was dead because I got out of bed to go look without turning on the light. The orange was gone. The face was black glass. The cloth grill looked like a mouth sewn shut. I laid my hand on the top and felt the cool of enamel and dust. No hum, no breath. The voices began anyway. Not loud, just close. They came from the slab under my bare feet, the pipe that ran along the joist, the space inside the walls where the insulation slouched like old fur. "She thinks it's over," said the first man. "She thinks snipping a wire stops what knows her." The woman's voice was kind. "She doesn't want to be here for the morning," she said. I stood very still in that dim, no-light basement and thought about leaving in the middle of the night with a duffel and my textbooks. The way my mother left a house in Waco with me in the back seat and the radio droning about traffic on I-35. I thought about staying. The radio I could unplug, sell for parts, throw out. The other thing came on schedule. The other thing always knew the time. I moved out a week later. The landlord sent a single line, "You'll lose your deposit," and then a winking emoji that made me want to pour salt in the junction box on my way out. I left the key on the counter and didn't go down to look at the radio a last time. I slept on Lexi's futon while I hunted for other doors. In a month, I had a studio near a taqueria with no basement to keep the day in it. I bought a white noise machine and told myself I'd be the kind of woman who doesn't wake at 3. You don't listen for something until you've heard it once. After that, silence becomes a shape you can measure. The first night in the new place, I woke for no reason and watched the digital clock turn to 3:07. Nothing happened. My heart beat hard anyway. I lay there and counted the hums of the refrigerator, the sigh of a truck far away on Mopac. Every night for weeks I did it again, and nothing happened, and that should have cured it. It didn't. A month later, on a rare cool morning, I was folding laundry with the window cracked to let in the cedar smell from outside, and a radio somewhere in someone's house caught a signal and let it leak into the air. A burst of static. A woman laughing, a man saying something I couldn't make out. It lasted 3 seconds. I dropped the towel I was holding and stood with my hands full of air. The sound came and went like a fish showing its back. I told myself it was a neighbor's sports broadcast, a taxi dispatcher, a police band. I told myself every possible grown-up thing, and I knew all of them might be true and it didn't matter. Because I had learned the weight of 307 in the dark, because when the radio's pilot light went out for good, the voices learned to come without it. Sometimes now I put the white noise on high and talk to the air as I move around my little studio, on purpose letting the words go heavy into corners, typing them into the walls the way smoke writes itself on ceilings. I say boring things. I narrate the making of coffee. I speak my grocery list out loud. It feels like teaching a stranger what I want them to know about me. Like setting out a dish of milk for cats I will never see. And when I wake for no reason and the numbers on the clock slip into that shape, I listen for what the air has kept, and I tell myself that if there's a voice out there whispering back my life, it has been defanged by familiarity. On good nights, nothing answers. On other nights, when the air is heavy and a thunderstorm sits over the city and holds its breath, I hear a scratch of static as a question mark, and inside it the softest voice, my grandmother's, saying my name from all the floors below. If you've ever rented a place because the pictures looked bright and clean, you know the first week is a honeymoon where you forgive everything. The Houston house came with mowed grass, a swing left by some previous kid, and a basement that smelled like laundry soap and cold stone. After the moving truck rattled away and we ate pizza on the floor, the AC kicked on with a complaint like an old dog. Mia laughed and said, "It's fine. We'll make it ours." We said that a lot that August like a spell. Down the sticking basement door and the weak tea light, 3 walls were smooth gray. The 4th, only a rectangle 6 feet wide, was rough, pebbled, bulged a little, as if someone had slapped concrete there in a hurry and walked away. I dragged my knuckles across it and came up powdery. DIY, I told Mia. She wrinkled her nose and called it ugly. We forgot it because life turns oddities into scenery when there are lunchboxes to fill and emails to answer. The first tapping came on a Wednesday just after midnight. Not the AC, not settling. A metronome inside the ribs of the house, tap, tap, pause, tap. I got up because that's what dads do when a sound has the nerve to keep their family awake. The stairs complained, but the tapping stopped as soon as I reached the concrete floor. The washer ticked as it cooled. The little window was a coin of darker dark. I stood there long enough to feel foolish and went back up. It's amazing how many things a marriage runs more smoothly without naming. By Friday, the tapping had a personality. It waited for quiet and then performed. That afternoon, Sam wandered up with a dinosaur in each hand and said, "The wall is knocking at me." You can believe a lot of things until your 6-year-old says them out loud. "What wall, buddy?" "The scratchy one." He tapped the door frame, tap, 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 and smiled like he wanted us to be proud. Mia's eyes said, "Don't feed the dragon." That night, 2 a.m., the metronome returned, steady as a teacher's pencil on a desk. In the dark, Mia's fingers found mine and squeezed. "It's the pipes," I whispered, which was brave until you remembered there weren't any in that wall. Saturday, we decided to be brave with coffee in us. Like an exorcism, but with Tide Pods, Mia joked. We went down together. Sam in superhero pajamas, the three of us a parade of pretend confidence. The basement air felt colder than it had any right to. A fine drift of gray dust lay at the base of the patch. Fresh, Mia whispered. Something tapped from inside the concrete, 3 careful knuckles. Sam tucked behind my leg. We stood there until standing felt like the least safe thing to do. Then went upstairs in a line without talking. The landlord, a man named Duke who believed in emojis and deferred maintenance, texted back hours later. Old place, settling, that's exterior fill. When I asked about the patch, he wrote, previous tenant was a DIYer. Don't mess with it. Mia read it and said, we won't mess with it. She meant me. Sunday evening I went down with a hammer and a flat bar anyway. Not curiosity, dread, the kind that follows you like a sock glued to your heel from the dryer. I told myself I would just sound the surface. I rapped the hammer against the patch and felt the shock in my elbow. From inside came 3 answering thuds, close as a palm on the other side of a door. My mouth said hey without me. The wall swallowed it. I found a seam where rough met smooth and worried it open, shaving off gritty flakes. Concrete is patient. Panic isn't. A crack became a black smile and a smell slid out. Cold hospital metal with a sweetness like old flowers. I widened the gap and sent my phone light into the dark. A shallow cavity. Torn plastic sheeting. A milk crate. Further in, my beam found the curve of a bowling ball. Purple swirled with glitter. A name engraved silver. Duke. Something snapped the light a tap, quick as a flicked finger, and my breath came back tasting like pennies. I taped cardboard over the gap and shoved the laundry basket in front like a dog burying a bone seconds before the family walks in. I told no one. Silence has its own odor, and Mia smelled it. In bed, she said, we can move. Pride answered for me. We just got here. At 3:02, the tapping came again, steady and patient, like someone knocking who knows you're home. Monday afternoon, a police cruiser idled at the curb. The officer in mirrored shades asked if we'd heard noises. The neighbor swore she'd heard crying underground. We smiled too big and blamed the washer. That night, Sam slid between us at 3, already crying. It said my name wrong, he whispered. The tapping had become a rhythm that tried and failed to be a song. Tuesday, I borrowed a proper chisel from the maintenance shop and came home under the lie of a dentist appointment. If I text you to take Sam to a motel, just go, I told Mia. She didn't ask if what. The patch came out like a bad tooth. The cavity breathed cold. I slid in on my back. Dust made paste on my neck. Silverfish scattered. The milk crate held a child's shoe with a cartoon rocket, a cracked plastic cup, a wired bundle, a charger for a phone 2 generations dead. The bowling ball wore dust in a ring where it had tried to turn and couldn't. Near the back, plastic sheeting covered a long shape. It wasn't a body. You want me to say that plainly? It was the outline where a body had been. A shadow pressed into grit and time like the pale rectangle on a wall after a picture is taken down. My light dimmed to a coal. In that beat of almost dark, breath touched my ear from the wrong direction. Not air moving, breathing. I shoved myself backward so fast I left skin on concrete. Something brushed my ankle that wasn't stone. The pounding started when I was in the open. Not angry, not fast, purposeful. The way you hammer at a door because you know there's help on the other side. We called the police and this time told them everything. Duke arrived in a polo with Duke stitched on the pocket as if to confirm the ball. He stood very still. It was a mess, he told the officer, which is a word people use for floods and toddlers, not for what you patch into a wall. They put blue tape across the basement door and paper on a clipboard and told us to get a hotel. At the hotel, I woke at 3:07 to tapping behind the headboard, familiar as a ringtone. I put my hand on the drywall. A knuckle knocked back once, gentle as a greeting. I didn't wake Mia. There are only so many times you can tell the same truth before it becomes a story no one believes. The city sent 2 men in canvas to measure and mutter. We moved our clothes out and slept at my sister-in-law's while an inspection happened without us. When we came back for the last boxes, the house felt emptied of something and heavier for it. The basement door had a printed sign, "Do not enter." Dust had tracked our stairs like gray snow. Sam asked if we'd left his dinosaurs behind the scratchy wall to keep it company. We told him no and meant yes to something else. We broke the lease and started over across town in a 1-story with no stairs. The silence there didn't weigh as much. Still, on certain nights when the AC sighed and the air hung like a held breath, I'd feel a weighting in the walls that had nothing to do with weather. You can call it nerves. I did, loudly. A week later, a letter came with no return address. Inside was a square Polaroid, a rough concrete wall with a fresh patch the size of a door. In the bottom corner, a hand had been caught mid-knock, blur in the act of tapping. Someone had written on the white margin in careful, childish print, "I said hi, you didn't say it back." The picture smelled faintly, impossibly of cold flowers. I think about Duke sometimes, about how he knew what he was covering and chose the word mess like you can mop history. I think about the outline stamped into dust, the arcs the bowling ball etched, the way the breath found my ear as if it knew the shape of me. Mostly I try not to, but on nights when sleep slips off like a bad shirt and the house gets very quiet, I put my palm to the nearest wall and wait, just to prove to myself there's nothing there. Sometimes the wall is only wall. Sometimes tap, pause, tap. It remembers my name and says it almost right. People think retirement is a long nap. For me, it was a long hallway. You turn the same light switches, make the same coffee, watch the same neighbors walk the same dogs past your split level on the edge of San Antonio, and the hallway keeps going. My daughter says routine is good, that it keeps me regulated. She says it the way you talk about an appliance. Maybe I am. A coffee maker with a bad shoulder and a drawer full of Spurs shirts, and a basement I never asked for. Poured into the hill like an apology because this city floods and the builder knew I'd worry about water until I died. The first drip came while I was making eggs, not the scatter splash of a leak. A measured, polite drop from under the floor. Drip, 2 breaths. Drip. I ignored it the way men ignore the first rattle in the car. Our basement is a concrete shoebox with a sump pump that grumbles like an old dog and an unplugged freezer I don't trust. When it rains, the air down there tastes metallic like keys against the tongue. By the 3rd day of dripping, I called a plumber. He was cheerful and young and tapped pipes as if they owed him rent. We stood in the kitchen to listen. The house held its breath. "Lines are good, pumps good, foundations good," he said. I paid him for being certain of nothing. That night the drip resumed. Closer now, a metronome hidden somewhere in the ribs of the house. Alone you learn your sounds. You know when they mean you. I went down with the bulb on its chain and found a new puddle in the middle of the floor. Not a random spill. A neat coin of water that shivered though nothing dripped from above. I crouched. The cold of it felt like it belonged to a river. When I stood, the circle had widened at one end into 2 thin lobes. A footprint that hadn't learned how to be a footprint yet. The next evening, there were 3 puddles, each with its own shape. Leaf, ear, the number 6. I wiped them with a towel and talked to the empty room like an old fool. The second plumber brought a moisture meter and the dignity of not smiling at me. "No active leak," he said. He offered to leave sensors overnight. I told him to save them for somebody with a problem. He left and the drip grew louder as if taking offense at being misdiagnosed. There is a trick to fear when you're older. You mistake it for annoyance until it's too late. I slept badly. Near 2 a.m., I woke to a shape moving on my bedroom ceiling. Not a shape, a shadow cast by something wet on the floor. I opened the door and found them. Wet footprints coming up from the basement in a staggering line, each one smudged at the edges like watercolor. They ended neatly 2 feet from my bed. I followed them down. The cold deepened like a polite hand on my ankle. On the concrete near the pump, the water had gathered into letters. My name. It wavered as if written by breath on glass. You don't call anyone for that. You don't want that story recorded in a stranger's mouth. I dragged the mop through my name until it was a smear, and sat on the steps with the handle across my knees like a spear. The silence thickened. From far off, I heard a wet breath, a faint suck and sigh, the way a swimmer sounds when they surface and don't want to be noticed. Morning returned everything to good sense. I swept the patio. I refilled the bird feeder and watched grackles swarm like an organized crime family. I lied to my daughter about how I slept. In the afternoon, I drove to the hardware store and bought sealant, as if you can paint over worry. A wool sky pressed the neighborhood flat. Downstairs, the floor was dry. The pump, a model citizen. I told myself I had dreamed the rest. At dark, the drip began again. The interval shorter now, like footsteps behind thin drywall. In the kitchen, it sounded as if it were behind the fridge. In the hall, it walked with me, matching my pace. Around 10, I sat at the top of the basement stairs with a beer on the landing and said, "Show me." and immediately wished I hadn't. The answer arrived as smell first, river mud and old leaves. Then as temperature, a cool that knew my bones by name. The bulb lit the concrete in its lemon circle. Far side of the room, the wet made lace. A shape set itself down, 2 feet placed together closer to right. The drip stopped. The freezer door shivered as if a draft flirted with it. The water feet lifted, not with sound but with a thinning, and set down again half a step closer. I backed up 1 stair. "You can't come up," I said. "We like rules when we don't have power." The water did not care. It took another step and paused at the bottom stair like a dancer memorizing a routine. Something dropped from nowhere and struck the silence with the authority of a clock. I slammed the door and slid the bolt. Gestures comfort the body even when the mind knows they are pageantry. I slept in the recliner with the TV mumbling and woke sore, a penny taste in my mouth. On the top step, a wet half moon like a glass ring told me the rule had been considered and set aside. I thought of leaving. I pictured my daughter's guest room and her husband's practiced kindness and the ache of being grateful in your own child's house. Pride is a late disease. It doesn't kill you. It just keeps you from taking the medicine. I went down and told the air I was not afraid. The water gathered itself into a hand, 4 long fingers and a thumb that grew more thumb-like every time it set down. I called the cheerful plumber back, because cheerfulness is a kind of armor. He set 2 little gray sensors with green eyes that blinked when humidity rose. "They'll chirp if there's a spike," he said, leaving me the handheld readout as if giving a man a pet to take care of. They chirped around 11, when the steps started again under the skin of the house. The number climbed. I opened the basement door and the cold came up with patient confidence. Across the floor, 2 points of shine appeared like eyes underwater. I don't know why I said my wife's name then. I hadn't meant to, but it rose out of me with the old prayer I used to say when machines were beeping in a room that never got dark. Elena. The damp in the air trembled. The water moved differently, not as parts now, but as the suggestion of a person. Edges slipping, height wrong, a head bent the way hers bent when she read, a shoulder slightly tilted from the old accident on Loop 1604 when we were young and immortal. "I'm here," I said, and didn't know if it was brave or foolish. The drip stopped entirely. The hand shape set on the bottom stair. The feet steadied themselves. It took the first step with the certainty of someone relearning stairs after a long time in a place without them. I didn't run. My knees would have made a run look comic. I stood in the kitchen while wet half-moons printed on the wood 1 at a time, until the marks reached the threshold and stopped. The water pooled on the line like a well-behaved guest waiting for invitation. I remembered the rug that used to live there, the one Elena loved, the one that smelled like dog after the flood 3 springs back, the one we rolled and threw away while the neighbors passed buckets and someone laughed too hard. Because that's what people do when they are scared and useful at the same time. Maybe the house remembered where we told water to stop. Maybe water doesn't forget the places it was refused. "If you're her," I said, "you know where the photo is." A foolish test, but foolishness is what a man brings to the last part of a hallway. The water left the threshold and slipped along the baseboard. Not toward the framed pictures, but toward the cabinet by the fridge, the one with the junk drawer and the extra batteries, and shoved behind a ball of rubber bands, an envelope with a single photo. Elena on the riverbank, hair slicked back, grinning at me in a way that has ruined entire afternoons. I had hidden it from the refrigerator door my first winter alone because I couldn't bear the way it pulled the day out of shape. The water paused at the cabinet. I opened the drawer, found the envelope, and slid the picture onto the counter. The face that looked up at me was younger than memory allows and therefore unfair. The damp brightened as if the room leaned closer. I placed the photo where the rug had once been. The water touched the corner and the paper buckled. For half a second the rippling made the smile move, not toward me, past me, into a distance that didn't include me. Then it steadied. The water held the picture like a palm holds a coin. Somewhere downstairs the pump coughed and decided not to help. The sensors showed spikes I could not integrate into any story that made sense to a plumber. I boxed them and returned them. The cheerful one said, "Sometimes houses talk," meaning to be kind when there's no fix in his truck. I nodded as if we shared a joke, but what I heard was not dismissal. It was permission. Now the drip visits most nights, less like a haunting and more like weather. It maps itself in shapes I don't always name. Sometimes a foot, sometimes a hand, once a curve like a shoulder turning away. I mop and hum, and sometimes I say her name and sometimes I don't. The footprints come up only to the threshold, except once. Last week when I woke to find a single wet oval beside my bed, like a blessing or a warning or both. The hallway is still long. The light switches still click, but the quiet has a companion now, soft and steady. When it stops, I lie awake and hold my breath, wondering if the jar has finally filled or if the house is only pausing to listen to me listening back. Either way, morning finds me. The air smells faintly of river. The photo stays on the counter, and each evening when I set my foot on the first stair, the cool reaches up around my ankle like a hand that knows me by touch and takes attendance, drop by patient drop, until I answer. I wasn't built for old houses. I'm a roofer in Lubbock, straight lines, warranties, iced coffee sweating down a cooler. And the places I trust are new enough that the nails still shine. That spring, Carmen asked if I'd help clear the farmhouse her aunt left behind, a squat box on the flat Texas plain with a porch that sagged like a tired mouth. We parked by a stock tank with a skin of yellow algae and let the wind pull our shirts tight. The house looked like it had been waiting with its eyes half closed. Inside was dust and mouse nest sour. We wore bandanas and boxed up cloudy jars and brittle cookbooks with butter stains from hands long gone. Carmen made a list, kitchen first, and there were 4 of us. Me, Carmen, her brother Eli, and my cousin Nate, who would volunteer to carry a piano if you promised there'd be a story afterward. We were unearthing a life one drawer at a time when Eli slid the big enamel oven to sweep, and the floor said a new word. It wasn't a trapdoor so much as a mistake that had waited years to be noticed. The boards by the stove were a different grain, hinged with rust that squealed when I lifted them. Cool air breathed up. A short set of steps led down into a square of dark that smelled like wet chalk and old laundry. Carmen shone her phone light and looked at me the way people look at ladders. I hate this, I'm doing it anyway. We went down sideways, shouldering the narrow. The light found a low room with walls of fieldstone and, in the middle, 2 tidy rows of little iron beds. 10 of them, child-sized, each with a thin mattress and a pillow, sheets tucked so smooth a coin would have bounced. At the foot of each bed sat a pair of small shoes, buckles, laces gone stiff, toes facing out like soldiers. The dust lay even over everything, that ash gray that softens edges and makes you feel like a loud person. Okay, Nate said softly for once. That's a choice. My aunt never had kids, Carmen whispered. She did church and yard sales. There was a chalkboard nailed to the far wall with faded numbers in a stern hand. 110, 1020. A shelf held tins of salve and cough drops with a logo older than me. The switch on the wall was cloth-wired and useless. We stayed long enough for the cold to get inside our shirts and then climbed out to the bright kitchen, like we'd been underwater too long. We shut the door, slid the oven back, and stood there trading the same look until all of us said it at once. We would pretend we hadn't seen it until we figured out what to call it. Carmen stayed the night on a pull-out couch because leaving felt like quitting a dare halfway through. I got there at sunrise with gas station tacos and bad coffee. The kitchen smelled of old soap. The oven sat precisely where we left it. Carmen didn't say good morning. She slid the oven aside with her hips like a nurse moving a patient and lifted the door. Cold breathed up. We went down together. One bed had changed. You could see it in the pillow first, a shallow, clean dip where a head had lain. The top sheet was no longer drum-tight, but pleated a finger's width near where a chest would be. The shoes at the foot were still paired, their tongues poking like little pink mouths. The dust around the bed had been disturbed in gentle swirls, as if something small had sat and swung its legs before remembering how to stand. I didn't touch it, Carmen said quickly. The way people confess when you haven't accused them yet. We didn't tell Eli or Nate, not then. We shut the hatch like you let a sleeping baby sleep and worked upstairs with unnecessary care. Talking too bright, bagging junk like it mattered what went where. When the others returned at noon, the kitchen felt like a waiting room. We lied by omission. Creepy, huh? Nate said, and we nodded like polite people in church. That night, we all slept at the farmhouse. We made a little camp of mattresses in the parlor and left the kitchen light off like not looking would keep the world in place. The house settled with the long-boned groans old houses have. Outside, the plain sounded like ocean trying to remember the word for wind. At 2 a.m, the kitchen light snapped on. It wasn't the click we heard so much as the fact of light pressing under the door. We walked in a line without deciding who'd lead. The switch was up. The oven had migrated 6 inches across the floor, scoring a pale groove. The hatch was lifted a thumb's width, enough for the dark to breathe at us. I put my hand on the oven as if it were an animal I might soothe, and then, because stories make you that kind of fool, I opened the door. The 5th bed this time. The pillow dented, the sheet slackened into a U. On the mattress near the pillow lay 3 grains of sand like small punctuation. Eli said maybe it was animals. Nate asked what animal tucks sheets. We didn't go farther in. We sat on the top steps with our shoulders crowding and listened to a cold that wasn't night, but something older that had borrowed night's quiet. Morning slapped the windows. 2 beds now looked freshly slept in. At the foot of the 3rd, the tiny shoes had been nudged closer to the iron bar, toes nearly touching. That part got to me. The dents you can call drafts. Shoes moving toward the exit is a mind. We did ordinary things because ordinary tries to fix what it can't understand. Eli wanted cameras. Nate talked salt and circles. Carmen said lock it, sell it, and forget the basement the way people forget the details of a scare. Instead, we swept a path between the beds, set the shoes carefully, and with a stub of chalk wrote our names on the corner of the board and the date like we were clocking in at a factory. When we came back from lunch, there was a word beneath ours in faint, halting letters. Rest. We looked at one another and nobody joked. Maybe it's not bad, Eli tried. He didn't finish the sentence. Maybe it's habit, I thought, and the word felt right. The room wasn't a haunting so much as a routine that didn't know it had outlived its maker. The 3rd night brought tapping under the kitchen floor. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap. It felt through the boards when I put my palm down. The way a stage carries footsteps. The oven slid again, bold. The hatch lifted. Cold poured with intention. Downstairs, the chalkboard wrote without a hand we could see, as if the room itself learned letters by muscle memory. Stay. You'd think that would make us leave. It didn't sound like a threat. It read like a plea scribbled in a margin. We sat on the stairs until the east got pale. And when we finally went down, the rows of beds were ruffled all in the same small way. Shoes inched forward like they were remembering where feet belonged. The air had the faint sour warmth of human sleep, that skin and breath smell that fades as the hour thins. Carmen sold the place a month later to a Dallas couple who wanted sunrise and quiet. The inspector missed the seam. The report said no basement. The world kept the shape it prefers. On our last day, we did the small kindness we knew. Washed and tucked the sheets, iron corners tight enough to pass inspection. Shoes paired, chalkboard wiped so gently the word stayed as a sheen you saw only when the light slanted just right. We wrote 2 words in block letters that made me feel like somebody's dad. We know. I think about that room more than I want to. Some mornings I wake in my duplex and the sheets hold my shape too long, and the air has that basement cool in it though the AC is off, and I listen to see if my kitchen is remembering footsteps. If you're expecting me to tell you we went back at 3 a.m. and saw 10 little bodies rise together like a tide, I didn't. What we got was smaller and sharper. Nights when the wind pinned the grass flat, the tapping would come once or twice under the floor. A careful reminder in Morse we never learned. Do I know what that room was? I have 5 guesses and none I'd bet rent on. A church shelter. A neighbor's project during the bad years. A place where rules were posted and children learned the art of lying still. The why has holes in it. The what, beds, shoes, chalkboard routine won't leave. I keep thinking about the way the shoes crept closer to the exit. A fraction each night. Like someone relearning how to leave after too much staying. If you drive the county road past the old place now, you'll see a square house with fresh paint and a new porch rail. They say the couple loves it. They say the mornings are quiet. They don't say anything about a basement because there isn't one on paper. I hope that's true for them. I hope whatever needed to practice the act of sleep learned enough to do it without us watching. But sometimes, walking through my own kitchen in the blue hour, I catch myself stepping lighter over a certain board as if not to wake someone. Sometimes the fridge hum falls just right and becomes a breath. Sometimes I put my hand on the counter and feel, deep in the wood, the faintest echo of a footfall. Tap, 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 like a child reminding a room of the steps. If that happens to you, if your house ever seems to practice, do it the way we did. Don't knock, don't pry. Keep the path clear. Tuck the corners. Write your name small in a corner where it won't bother anyone. Then turn off the light and go back to bed. and let the beds that remember do what they came back to do. The first night I noticed it, I blamed the mower. That fit the world I wanted. Simple, mechanical, fixable with a wrench and a paper towel. My Fort Worth place is a mid-century ranch with a low basement the realtor called a storm room, which is a brave way to describe a concrete trench with a bulb on a pull chain. I opened a kitchen window, ran the fan, and decided the smell would clear by morning. By the second evening, the odor came in with the heat, sweet metallic and cold in the nose. I crouched to the toe kick vent and there it was, stronger. Gasoline. I keep the mower and paint down there, sure, but this was different. Fresh and insistent, like the house was exhaling it up through the registers. I went down with a flashlight and the dust mask from when I painted the bedroom. The bulb hissed awake. The floor had a gray sheen that wasn't wet, just suggestive. The mower sat with its handle folded like a broken arm. A ring of cardboard under it wore an old flower of stain. I hauled the thing up the steps and left it in the yard, victorious for an hour. That night the smell returned, thicker. I woke around too dizzy, mouth coated in it, the room floating a little. The basement door at the hall's end looked like a decision I didn't want to make. I drank water, cracked 2 windows, and told myself it was in my head. A minute later the furnace kicked on and the house breathed the lie back at me. A plumber said, "Not my lane." The HVAC man said Friday. It was Tuesday. My neighbor Randy showed up with leftover ribs and a face like a helpful apology. "You look pale," he said. I told him about the smell. He unlaced his boots on my mat and moved through the basement like he owned stock. He tapped the 2 red plastic cans I keep on a shelf. "Old but shut," he said. Then he pointed behind the heater. "You keep more over there?" 3 green metal cans sat in the dark, clean of dust, caps bright. "I don't own those," I said, and heard how small I sounded. Randy didn't touch them. He studied the joists and the return duct. "Heat's pulling air from down here," he said. "You're breathing this. I'll haul them out." He did, one by one, arms shaking, handles groaning. On the driveway, he cracked a cap a hair. The scent slapped the daylight. He closed it quick. "Lock your windows tonight," he said, not looking at me. I locked the windows in the garage side door I never think about. I slept on the couch with the thermostat off, boots nearby, phone on my chest. Around 3 there was a little sound, metal kissing metal in the bones of the house like a plug finding a socket. The quiet afterward felt thoughtful. By morning the odor was in the drapes and my hair. I bought another carbon monoxide alarm even though those don't read gasoline, the hardware kid told me. And he was the kind of bored certain that made me feel foolish. I called the non-emergency line anyway. "Stay outside," the man said, and I did, feeling like I was abandoning a pet. 2 firefighters walked my steps, one carrying a meter that chirped like a cricket the deeper he went. "You've got fumes," he said. "Not explosion range right now, but unhealthy. You've also got a basement window on the east wall with a bad latch. Looks bright, want PD." Officer Molina took notes in neat, slow script, asking about X's and keys. I live alone. I changed the locks. No restraining orders, no dramatic history. Just a bookkeeping job at a body shop and a sister who texts me recipes at midnight. Molina nodded through my life like a man checking boxes, then said, "Don't stay here tonight." He meant it, so I didn't. I slept at my sister's and dreamed of walking through warm, invisible water. By Thursday afternoon, I was back to meet the HVAC man. The smell greeted us at the door. He frowned at the furnace, at the return, at the gaps someone had taped with blue painter's tape. "Who did that?" he asked. "Not me," I said. He peeled up the tape and squinted through a slot into the basement. "If someone wanted to," he told me in his teaching voice, "you could duct anything into your return." That sentence put a small cold nail through the day. He left with a promise to price new ductwork. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the house think. The cans were still on the driveway where Randy left them, like 3 mute witnesses. Dusk came early and mean. When the heat clicked on, the smell swelled in the hall again, sharper than before, as if someone had opened a fresh cap. I took the hammer off the hook by the water heater closet, not because I thought it would help, but because empty hands felt like lying. I opened the basement door. Air rolled up and made my eyes wet. I went down sideways, counting the steps. The bulb pushed a yolk-colored circle onto the floor. In the far corner near the furnace, a 4th can waited, dented. Its cap was cocked open a finger. A clear plastic tube ran from its mouth toward the plenum where the return duct draws. The tube was taped in place with the same blue painter's tape I'd seen upstairs. A little kitchen timer, mine from the drawer, sat on a power strip set to click the furnace fan on. "Don't," a voice said behind me, calm as an instruction label. He stood 3 steps up, blocking the way back to my hallway. Parka, gloves, pale eyes, a face you wouldn't notice buying drywall compound. He wasn't big. He looked like he knew where everything went. "You'll spark it," he said, nodding at the hammer. "Static, anything." "What do you want?" I asked. I could taste the gasoline now, a sweet burn that made thought slow. "To make it stop," he said, and the smile that came after those words did not belong to them. He gestured at the can with irritation, like a contractor critiquing his own work. "Windows, fans, neighbors," he said. "You keep ruining the simple plan. How did you get in?" He looked at the joists above us instead of me. "Houses talk," he said. "Some want quiet. Some don't like new people." "You pried the east window," I said, because saying the facts kept me upright. He shrugged like we were discussing the price of plywood. "You'll sit now," he said, pointing to the step. And I did, because my brain had decided to live to argue later. He reached past me, turned the little timer to off with 2 gloved fingers, and snugged the cap down like he was finishing a jar of pickles. He unplugged a power strip I hadn't noticed, the cord snaking to the outlet behind the furnace. He moved with tidy habits, no rush, like a man resetting a table. "You sleep with your wallet in the freezer," he said conversationally, proof that he had earned his way into my life by cataloging it. "Last Tuesday you left your back porch light on all night. I like the families better. A house stays warmer. Alone a house gets clever." He wanted me to turn my back and climb. I started up, left foot shaking. At the landing, something in me refused to be the person who retreated from her own basement. I threw the hammer, not well, not like a movie. It hit the bulb. The light popped in stuttered sparks. Both of us froze for that single bright heartbeat, waiting for the world to catch. It didn't. I dove. He lunged, and his shoulder hit the furnace hard enough to make a hollow drum sound. I hit the hallway, slammed the door, twisted the deadbolt, and leaned my whole weight against it. He struck the other side once, twice, testing, then stopped. The house listened with me. I called 911 from the porch with my hands shaking so badly I spelled my street wrong twice. The firefighters came back with masks and fans. PD swept the block. The east window's latch was peeled like a hangnail. Footprints marked the strip of damp dirt under the eaves, wide and patient. In the basement, they found the timer, the tube, the blue tape flattened with care. He had tightened the cap, unplugged the strip, and left the pieces like a diagram. "Do you know him?" Melina asked. "No," I said. And then, because it was also true, "He talks like he fixes things." I didn't sleep there again. I stayed with my sister while the ductwork was replaced and the window bricked. I sold the house in May after telling the agent everything. He told the buyers and they signed anyway. A couple expecting in July. They measured the living room and argued gently about where the crib would go. I stood there feeling like a thief of air. Sometimes I drive past on my way to the grocery store on West 7th like I accidentally turned wrong and ended up on my old street. The porch light is on now most nights. The east window is masonry. On damp mornings when Fort Worth smells like rain and hot asphalt, a thin metallic sweetness rides the wind and I find myself checking the car vents. Then the rear view. Then the street for a man in a parka who knows where everything goes. What lingers isn't the face or even the plan. It's the shape of the room at the bottom of the stairs. Bunker low and patient, breathing through its registers as though waiting for the right set of hands to teach it quiet again. I wasn't looking for mystery when I signed the lease. I just needed 4 walls, a kitchen, and a short commute to Franklin High. August in El Paso makes you bargain with your standards. The sun presses like a thumb on a bruise, and even a basement that smells like wet cardboard starts to sound like a perk. The landlord, a wiry man with nicotine fingernails, waved at the door beside the kitchen. "Storage down there. Don't worry about it." I didn't go down until the second weekend. I had classroom junk to stash, poster board I never used, a plastic skeleton missing 3 ribs, an army of Expo markers. The bulb over the stairs flickered the way all rental bulbs flicker, as if the electricity were cheap and tired. You don't step into that kind of basement so much as commit to it. One hand on the rail, one foot testing each creak, nose full of dust. The floor came into view, pale concrete scribbled with chalk. Not one drawing, circles, dozens. Big ones and small, imperfect but careful, overlapped like moons in an old textbook. Inside each circle lay some little thing. A plastic dinosaur with a chewed tail, a matchbox car with one door missing, a green marble that threw back the light, a rubber ball furred with dust. In another, a wooden block with a single letter. It should have been charming residue of play. But there was a neatness that didn't feel like kid. Each circle a place setting. Each toy a course. Something finished. I stood listening to the house's pipes clear their throats, then remembered I had ice cream melting upstairs. I told myself I'd sweep tomorrow. I didn't. I stacked my boxes along the far wall, stepping around the circles like puddles. That night I fell asleep after grading summer reading essays when I heard it. A patter against the wall, soft, quick, honest as a cat. I sat up, it stopped at once. I filed it under pipes. Around 3 it came again, traveled along the baseboard, paused beneath my bed, then faded like a cough swallowed in a church. The next afternoon I texted the landlord a picture. Basement art, I wrote. He replied, previous tenants had kids. You can mop it up. No apology. No explanation. Just mop it up. I bought a broom. Chalk rose in whispery clouds. Circles broke. Toys revealed ghost rings. My hands turned pastel. I bagged the toys, because throwing them away felt like throwing a face away, and shoveled the bag by the water heater. When I went back later, I saw a clean gray floor and felt better than I should have. That night the patter came earlier, around 10, while I was rinsing a coffee mug. 5 quick taps beneath the kitchen, directly over the basement stairs. I froze, foam sliding down my fingers. Then another series, skittering left to right like shoes behind a starting line. I opened the basement door and leaned in. The bulb swung from the draft and the concrete throat breathed back at me. "Hello?" I said to an empty stairwell. The sound stopped. When I closed the door, something tapped twice, polite as a knock that had decided on second thought not to be heard. Sleep was a truce. Just before 3, a softer rhythm began against my bedroom wall and then withdrew, like kids scattering from a broken window. In the morning, I found powder on the kitchen floor, the kind you get from dry hands. It tracked from the basement door to the edge of the fridge and disappeared where sunlight fell. I stopped at the library. You don't think you'll be the kind of person who researches her address, but I was that person. The librarian in a desert sunset sweater looked up the parcel info. That block had a daycare in the 60s, she said. Owner ran it out of her home. Basement playroom. There was a fire, no deaths. Insurance, maybe. Simple, tidy history, basement playroom, I repeated in my car. The phrase tasted like dust and gum. When I unlocked my door, I smelled both. Sweetness threaded through concrete. The floor was still gray. My bag of toys sat where I'd left it. The air felt occupied, like a classroom before the bell rings. That night, my podcast died at 2:34 a.m., a pop and sudden silence, and fingernails chattered softly on the baseboard behind my headboard. Fingers, drumming the way a child does when they can't keep still. "Stop," I said, because directives are where teachers begin. The sound stilled, then withdrew down the hall, down the stairs, each step a small refusal. In the morning, the E-block was gone. I found it by the basement door, a faint crescent of chalk on its edge. I brought it to school and kept it in my desk like a talisman. At lunch, I asked the science teacher, Carlos, if mice could tap like fingers. He said, if they're wearing shoes, and we laughed the way colleagues laugh when the alternative is saying I'm scared of my house. Friday after rehearsal, the sky bruised. My porch light sputtered. The bubblegum smell hit me so clean I tasted it. I held out my palm as if to collect contraband. The basement light hummed. I went down. Circles had reappeared. Not ghost rings. Fresh. Thick white loops, some smeared where whoever drew them had corrected the curve. Inside one, my missing E-block. Inside another, 3 expo markers like candles. The marble watched from the center of a circle by the water heater. I stood at the edge of the nearest line. My body knew not to step in. "Who's there?" I asked, dull with adrenaline. Silence except for the bulb's buzz and the neighbor's AC. I crouched. The chalk looked bright and newly abraded. I set my palm on the concrete just outside the line. It was cool. Then not. Warmth pooled against my skin. The kind you get when a kid hides their hands under yours during a clapping game. I jerked back and bumped my head on the low ceiling. Something giggled, the breathy squeak of a child trying to be quiet and failing. I went upstairs and set out snacks. It's okay, I told the air. Tapping resumed under the kitchen, 323. Pause. 323. Saturday I drove to the daycare address. The house was gone. A nail salon stood in its place, mirror windows reflecting the white sky. A boy pressed both palms to the glass and laughed before his mother lifted him away. I cried driving home and couldn't say whether grief or anger steered. That night, when the podcast died and the first patter ran along the baseboard, I said, "I know you're there." The sound stilled like an animal caught tasting sugar. "You can't be here," I added, because rules. "This is my house," a moment. Then faintly palms set down in disappointment. The tapping resumed and moved toward the door. I heard it descend the stairs, each step withdrawing like a tide. Sunday morning, new chalk, not letters exactly. Boxes for words, sticks for consonants, and oval where a face might be. At the start, the only clear letter, E, printed carefully, the one answer they had. I touched the E block where it sat in its circle. Warm, breathing under the stone. That week, the pattern held. The podcast would die. The taps would begin. I spoke. The sound paused, listening. Sometimes when I said no to the tap under the bed, it retreated. Other times it stayed, patient as a test I hadn't yet written. On Thursday, that breathy almost laughter came again, and I smiled. Not because it wasn't eerie, but because it sounded relieved. Friday, I bought sidewalk chalk. Near midnight, I drew one circle, big, sloppy, and put the E block in the center. I sat at the edge of it. "Show me," I whispered. The room held its breath. The patter came not from the walls but from the floor, a ripple moving toward me. Warmth circled my ankle and stopped at the line. "Okay," I said, the way I do when a student shows me the thing they've almost learned. I drew another circle and set the marble inside. The patter faltered, then resumed, small palms meeting old paint, laughter without a throat. We made a bargain. I would draw the circle. They would bring what they wanted kept. Circles multiplied. In one sat my ring of keys. In another, a tuft of hair I knew was mine. In another, the small gold saint my aunt sent when I started teaching, which I'd lost after the miscarriage and pretended I'd never had. The bulb steadied, unwavering. The bubblegum smell became less a scent than a presence. I can't say when I understood the circles were seats, not traps. I can only tell you that when I stood to go upstairs, tiny hands patted the wall in farewell and then, almost shyly, patted once against my leg. Not a grab. A correction. Like a child moving my fingers on a pencil to show pressure. I sat again and drew one last circle around myself, lazy and loose, an imperfect ring that admitted mistakes. Sometimes the podcast plays through. Now the house is a house again until it isn't. Some nights the taps return and I go down and talk about my day. The seniors who won't read the rubric, the sky that looks like a bruise and a promise. I don't tell anyone. Not Carlos. Not the landlord. The toys stay on my table. The E is in my pocket more often than my keys. If you ask what they want, I'll say attention, which is what all of us want when we're small and later. If you ask what I want, I'll say sleep, and I'll admit I want to keep being the person they come to. Last night, ants marched under the kitchen wall. The patter drove them back in quick shudders. When I draw the line, warmth answers. This afternoon, I drew a small circle near the stairs and put my house key in it. Just to see. I made tea, graded 2 essays, and came back down. The key was gone. In its place, a chalk E, 3 short lines, careful. Beneath it, a smear shaped like a smile or my own thumbprint. The patter started above, moving along the kitchen, down the hall toward my bedroom. Inviting. I'm going to sleep with the basement door ajar. The circles are below, cool and waiting. The house breathes like a child drifting after a tantrum. If the taps come, I'll answer. If they don't, I'll dream of chalk dust on little hands and a room where everything forgotten sits exactly where it should. Inside the line you draw when what you need isn't to keep something out, but to keep something in. We moved into the Galveston place in late September, when the air felt like a damp towel and the gulls laughed at everything. The house sat up on pilings, gray and salt-bitten, the kind you rent because the price is honest about its bruises. Even before we opened the door, you could smell the mix. Old wood, sea brine, and the kind of mold you only see when the light slants just so. It wasn't a forever house. It was a meantime house. I told my wife, June, that meant we could forgive it for what it was. Down in the lower room, what the realtor called it. Because basements don't make sense on the island. The floor was cracked concrete and the air had that permanent damp that crawls under your shirt. Under the stairs sat a coal furnace the size of a dresser, ugly as a rusted car. Disconnected, the realtor said, like a blessing. We had ductless units upstairs. The wires to the furnace were cut and taped. I planned to haul it out once I had a friend with a truck. The first week was storms and errands. At night, the rain switched on and off like a kid playing with a light. We walked the seawall at dusk because Maddie, our 12-year-old, said the beach made her feel like her head was bigger in a good way. She brought home bits of driftwood and lined them on the kitchen counter like bones she was learning the names of. We were ordinary in the way you get when nobody knows you yet. On Wednesday after midnight, I woke to the smell of scorched metal, the intimate spoon in a flame smell. The house hummed with wind and distant thunder. When I opened the lower room door, a fat heat rolled up the stairs. The furnace sat there in the dark like a sleeping dog with its eyes half open. The little square of glass in the hatch showed a dull red, no brighter than a cigar coal. I put my hand near the hatch and flinched. It was heat with breath in it. Sulfur threaded through it like a thought. "June?" I called. "Did you flip something?" Even as I said it, I knew how stupid it was. The breaker to the whole lower room had been off since move-in. I'd cut those wires myself and coiled them like dead snakes. I opened the hatch. Inside, nothing. No coal, no ash, just iron. The glow pulsed once like a muscle and steadied. I shut the hatch and stood there a long time with my palm on the glass like a man reading a pulse. By morning, cold iron, no smell. I told myself heat lingers and metal remembers. That story lasted until dark. The next night the glow was back, and this time I wasn't alone. "Dad?" Maddie's voice drifted down the stairs. "Why is it on?" She came to the last step in bare feet, hair in her face, eyes reflecting the red. "Don't touch it," I said. "It's residual." The word sounded thin. She stared at the hatch the way kids stare at the ocean when they hear it before they see it. "There's a face," she whispered. "It's a reflection. It's Mrs. Alvarez." I looked harder. The red blurred and shifted the way heat does. For a moment I could have sworn I saw our neighbor's mouth forming a word and failing. Then the glow breathed and the glass showed only me, older and uncertain. June came down tying her robe, irritation already loaded. "You're not seriously—" she started, and then the heat rolled out and took whatever she was going to say and cooked it. "Turn it off," she said, "because that's what you say when a thing happens that shouldn't." I taped the hatch, covered the cut wires with more tape, wedged a toolbox in front of the door like theater helps. I searched my phone for explanations: condensation, capacitance, ghost current, words that felt like umbrellas in a gale. Thursday, Rosa Alvarez didn't go to school. Stomach bug, the group text said. Old Mr. Henley on the corner didn't sweep his porch at 8 like he always did. After dinner, Henley came to our back door in his cap, smelling like rain. "You got iron down there?" he asked. When I said yes, he nodded like a man hearing bad weather rumors he already believes. "Storm of 58 ran those furnaces red for 3 days," he said. "Heat seasons a house. Sometimes it seasons the people." He tapped our doorframe with one knuckle and left before I could tell him we were modern and reasonable, and taped on around 2:30. The tape on the hatch lifted by itself with a soft peel. The glow sharpened until the little square of glass threw a bloody pane onto the floor. Inside the red, I saw movement that wasn't fire. Forms rolled up like faces surfacing in a tide pool. Henley in his cap. A boy I didn't know. Mrs. Alvarez, her lips working soundlessly. I shut the hatch and heard 5 faint taps move away through the ducts, vent to vent, like a hand feeling its path through the house. The storm finally made up its mind and came in hard on Friday night. The lights went out around 2. The silence after a power cut is a thick thing. The furnace didn't care about the grid. It woke and breathed. I went down with a flashlight and steam turned my beam into a small, useless spear. The glow had climbed beyond the hatch. The iron ticked as it expanded. The smell shifted from metal to something sweet and wrong. In the glass I saw a procession. Faces rinsed thin by heat, drifting by as if the ducts emptied into some red river. A young man with a crooked smile. Henley's cap. A shape that suggested Rosa. When the face that might have been mine leaned from the red, the heat flexed, and I found myself stepping closer like a moth that remembers fire and goes anyway. "Stop," I said to the metal because there wasn't anyone else to say it to. The furnace pulsed once in a way that felt like laughter you couldn't hear. Upstairs, a vent clicked open. From Maddie's room came the sound of a breath catching and catching again like air with teeth. I ran the house like a man checking locks. Each old vent exhaled a warm draft with a sulfur thread. June lay in our bed stiff as a fresh cast, heat coming off her like the coils of a stove. Maddie sat up, hugging her drawing pad to her chest. On the top page, she'd sketched the furnace with faces in the hatch. One had Henley's cap, another had my nose. "Don't draw me in there," I said. "I didn't," she said. "It drew you." I tried to move it myself then, jammed a dolly lip under the base, strained like an idiot. The iron screamed. Through the glass, something leaned toward me and wore my face back like a mask worn wrong. It mouthed a word I couldn't stand to hear. Then it became Maddie's face trying to say "Dad," and failing because heat makes language stupid. I dropped the dolly and suddenly all the vents tapped in sequence, a ripple passing through the house. I don't know why I thought of water. Maybe the hose coiled by the washer looked like an answer. I ran it up the back steps and into the storm, fed the rain down the hatch. Steam roared up. The basement filled with a white that tasted like pennies and old hair. The hose shook in my hands like a living thing. For a while, seconds, an hour, a life, the furnace screamed without sound. Then the glow dimmed to a sick ember and went the color of old blood on iron. In the pale morning that follows those kinds of nights, the street had sirens at both ends. An ambulance crouched at the Alvarez's. A sheet moved in a way a sheet should never move. Henley's porch light burned 2 days before someone turned it off. People said storm. People said bad luck. No one said seasoned. I hired 2 men and a truck the first dry hour I could find. We levered the furnace onto a dolly, rolled it out into honest daylight, ratcheted it like a dangerous animal. At the scrapyard, the clerk said, "Pretty piece," and I said he could have it cheap. He asked if I wanted to watch them cut it. I told him I had to pick up my kid. We came home to a square of clean in the dust where it had sat like a chalk outline. I capped the old vents with foil tape and screws. I told myself we had done a visible thing and therefore the invisible would comply. That night the house breathed easier. We slept the way you sleep after a fever breaks. At 3:07, funny how a time can become a knock. You could have missed it if you weren't listening. A soft click from the hallway grate. The smallest sigh of warm air moving, as if something still knew the route even with the road closed. I lay there with my eyes open and watched the thin line under our door shift from black to a color I won't dignify by naming. When it faded, the doorknob was warm enough to hold my palm like a hand. A new family moved into Henley's place a week later. Their little boy rides his scooter in tight circles, and sometimes he stops and looks at our house the way kids look at ocean water that sounds wrong, curious and afraid in the same mouth. Maddie draws again. When she sketches the street, she leaves the lower room stairs out by accident. We laugh about that and we don't. Some evenings, if the wind turns and the gulls go quiet, I smell pennies or salt, or the match-blown-out tang you taste on your tongue. In that dim moment before the lamps come on, a hairline of color glows faintly along our baseboards, tracing where the old vents used to be. It's nothing you could photograph. It's not even something I can convince June I see. But when I hear a soft tap move through the rooms like a careful hand, I find myself answering in my head the way you answer a familiar knock. We did a visible thing. Maybe that's all any of us can do. But the island keeps its own ledger and heat remembers. On nights when the tide is high and the air sits heavy and the clocks creep through 3, I lie very still and rehearse the shape of my daughter's name, just in case the house ever asks me to give it up, syllable by syllable, to keep the red from blooming on the other side of the door. The first winter in the house, the furnace smelled like cooked pennies. Tara said dust was burning off and to give it a week. Amarillo cold gets into your elbows. Our starter home had cheer upstairs, fresh paint, hand-me-down couch, and gloom below. Upstairs was cheerful. Below was not. Concrete, one pull-chain bulb. Shelves bowed under other people's decisions. We told each other it was enough. The night it began, I was awake from habit, counting squeaks in the vents the way I count lug nuts at the tire shop so I don't send a pickup down I-40 with a wobble. Tara does a 3-breath swim before sleep, and I was listening for it when I heard a rhythm under us, not the ping of metal or water hammer. Heel then toe, a human pace crossing under us, then stopping. I got up, opened the basement door, and met the cool dark that smells like damp cardboard even when nothing is wet. I stood at the top step until the hairs along my arms settled one by one, then pulled the chain. The bulb threw a dirty circle onto the wooden stairs. I went down because you have to. Because if you don't, the sound moves into your head and rents a room. The concrete floor kept its secrets. I stood there until the cold made the skin ache around my nails. Nothing moved. I came back up, lied to the bed by being brave, and let the house breathe around us. Morning made the world ordinary. Tara slid eggs onto plates and kissed me with the smile she keeps for when she's not sure I'm being dramatic. "Old houses knock," she said. I told her I probably just wanted something wrong so I could fix it. "Then fix it," she said and squeezed my hand. Night 2, 11 on the dot, heel then toe, from the laundry corner toward the square of our bedroom. Heel to, a metronome you could walk behind. A clean stop under my side of the bed like a stopwatch thumb. We didn't speak. The gap after the last step felt full, like someone had set down a bag of listening. 15 seconds later, heel, toe back the other way. Machines don't pace, I thought. Machines don't wait. On the third night, Tara whispered without turning. "You hear it too." No question in it. "Neighbors?" I offered, thin even to me. Our houses were separated by a driveway and a strip of murdered grass. "That's below," she said. "Beneath us." I held her hand and felt the pulses sync with the steps. By daylight, we made couple plans. Pest guy if rats, Pete if pipes, furnace man if the penny smell stayed. "And if it's ghosts," Tara said, trying to laugh. "We move." The laugh didn't stick. That evening, I took the shop light down and set it on a bucket, casting a hard cone. I swept, slow and deliberate, because sweeping is a way to pretend you're in charge. Dust turned the light into a climbable shaft. Nothing scurried. Nothing tapped back. I came up pretending I'd answered something. On night 4, the rhythm arrived earlier, as if it knew our schedule. 7 paces. Stop beneath the headboard. A soft shift like a person turning. I slid out of bed and Tara grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she breathed, then let go because pride is a little god we both worship. In the basement, the cone of light showed what sweeping had made legible. Shoe prints. Not mine. My shop boots would have left chunky chevrons. These were the grid of a man's sneaker, fresh in the dust, walking from the stair foot toward the space below our bed, then ending at a clean rectangle like the rest of the room didn't deserve to be touched. No returning prints, no arc of a turn, just arrival. "Tara," I called before I could stop myself. She came anyway, one step at a time. When she saw, her hand went to her mouth, caught between laugh and cry. "You did that to scare me," she said, needing the lie. I pointed to the lack of return prints. We stood in a silence, busy with thought. Sleep came dear. The steps resumed near 3. In the morning, we practiced normal. Toast, coffee, weather. I went to the shop and told Pete about a void under our slab the way a man says mole instead of tumor. He loaned me his hammer drill. That evening, I cut along a hairline crack where the prints ended. The drill made the basement a bell. Concrete dust tastes like bitter coins. When I levered up a rectangle, I expected dirt. There was a cavity, 6 inches of nothing, then wood, board fitted tight like a lid edged with old felt. I slid a kitchen spatula under, worked slow, and lifted. Warm wax and old closet puffed out. What lay beneath wasn't a crawl space. It was a corridor directly under our bed. 2 rail-thin tracks of oiled wood, the rest raw. Even under dust, the tracks gleamed. At the far end, a plank wall honey-shined. No turnaround. No junction. A tube inviting you to walk and press your forehead against its finish. I couldn't stand inside it. The house had been built over a habit. Tara crouched beside me. "Close it," she whispered. I slid the lid back and rested the concrete like a temporary tombstone. We went up and kept the lights on. It didn't help. At 11, the steps traced their patient loop, the timing matching the corridor. 7 paces, pause. A small sound like weight resting against polished wood. The vibration climbed the bed frame. We called a contractor to stitch the world back into ordinary. He said daylight phrases: sub-slab ventilation, vapor barrier, slab repair. He touched the oily track and wiped his fingers on his jeans. "You ever see a bowling alley?" he asked. "They oil a path so the ball keeps speed." Not helpful, but true. He left a radon pamphlet and a number we couldn't pay. "You're sure nobody has a key?" he asked, unable to believe a problem could be what it was. That night, the steps came early. "We should go to my sister's," Tara said. It sounded like solution and surrender. "One more night," I said, like a gambler promising to quit. We packed a bag by the door and did not sleep. "Around 2, when the world thins," I said, not loud. What do you want? The stillness afterward had teeth. Then the pacing resumed, calm as rain. Morning brought a truce. I went down one last time because people visit whatever scares them. To prove the thing is still where it was. The lid had shifted a hair, just enough to say lids are suggestions. On the track, a crescent smear had appeared as if a damp brow had rested and dried. I felt seen. We moved the bed. Ridiculous and instantly necessary. We dragged it 2 feet left so the headboard no longer aligned with the corridor. We laughed, acting out a superstition. That night the steps traced their 7 and ended where the bed used to be. The pause held there, long and intent, like a visitor who rings and waits because they know you're home. When nothing answered, the steps set off again, resolved. A new sound joined, a soft rub against the underside of the floor. At 3:20, our phones flashed dead battery and the house went perfectly still. No fridge hum, no wind. In that vacuum, separate footfalls sounded on the bedroom carpet, starting at the wall and walking toward the moved bed. The mattress accepted faint weight near my feet, the way it does when a cat jumps up. We don't own a cat. Tara's hand crushed my wrist. The footfalls below resumed, the house running 2 songs in the round. We left in daylight. I dropped Pete's drill on his porch and told the landlord there was a gas leak on the block and we had to get out. He said he'd send someone. We told ourselves we were dramatic, that a week at Tara's sister's would restore perspective. Nights there were noisy with nephews, dishwasher, TV, laughter. We slept. 2 weeks later, I drove past at dusk because curiosity is the meaner twin of love. A new tenant in a denim jacket stood on the porch, phone up, recording the train a mile away. He saw me, lifted a hand. I almost warned him. What would I say? Beware the corridor under the skin of the house. Don't align your bed with the track. Don't mistake patience for kindness. Sometimes I wake at 11 and listen. It's always nothing. Pipes talking, someone making tea. At the swim of Tara's breath, I think of that polished wood oiled for passage. I think of prints that ended at a clean rectangle, as if the next step wasn't one you could see. I think of the night the quiet walked on the carpet. We tell ourselves we escaped because we drove away, but I know better. Houses are habits that learn their people. Somewhere under the neat bed of a man who likes trains, a patient pace keeps time. 7 steps, pause. The leaning of a brow against smooth wood. One night he'll move his bed to make room for a dresser to chase a draft, and the pause will arrive beneath the new headboard with the punctuality of tide. It will feel like the house saying, there you are, it wasn't a hallway to somewhere else. It was the idea of a walk, a loop under a life, a way for something to keep wearing a path until the boards remembered feet and the feet remembered us. Some nights I wake sure I can hear it 30 miles away. Patient heel and toe working at the floor of the world the way water works at stone. When Tara rolls toward me, I keep my hand on her wrist and count, pretending I'm timing a machine. Machines don't pace. People do. We moved into the house on a cool Monday, the kind of coastal cool that smells like metal and wet rope. Corpus has a way of making even good days feel used. The gulls scream like drunks. The porches wear a permanent crust of salt. I got the place because I knew a guy who knew a landlord, which is how most miracles and disasters begin. 4 of us split the rent, me, Tori, her boyfriend Manny, who worked nights at the refinery, and Leah, a nursing student who carried a smooth worry stone in her pocket. Like a superstition she was trying to outgrow. The house was old and high-shouldered, a bungalow with a crooked smile, and a basement you could smell before you saw. Salt, mildew, a metallic damp that made your teeth feel sad when they were wet. We told ourselves lots of things. The first week felt normal. Cheap coffee, thrift store plates, that happy exhaustion of having managed a move without ruining any friendships. We made a rule about dishes that none of us kept and a rule about labels on fridge food that all of us ignored. We never used the basement, only the door. If you stood at the top of the stairs, you could get enough privacy to take a call without the whole house hearing. The steps ran down into a rectangle of dark where a single chain light hung, rarely on. The handrail left your palm gritty with salt, the kind that creeps through boards and wants to stay. The echo started as a joke. Manny shouted into the stairwell, "Rent fairy, take pity!" And Leah, because she was Leah, leaned in and whispered something soft I didn't catch. Nothing answered. We laughed, went back to the microwave that required a punch to behave, and forgot about it until 2 in the morning when the microwave beeped, and from the stairwell a voice said, clear as a recording, "Rent fairy, take pity." It was Manny's voice, same lazy drawl, same amused stress on pity, but wrong in the way a badly dubbed movie is wrong. The sound came up slow, as if the steps were reeds and our words had to be pulled through. We stood in the blue kitchen light and nobody breathed for a count of 10. After that, we tested it. Around dinner, Tori read a grocery list into the stairwell. Coffee filters, limes, paper towels, eggs, and at 3 a.m., the house delivered it back, one item at a time with thinking pauses between them. As if learning the shape of each word, Leah flushed and asked if we could stop. Hearing her own voice float up out of a hole felt like being called by herself from farther down the road. I told her sound traveled weird in houses on blocks, that humidity can bend it, that the stairwell was a trumpet mouth. I heard how thin those words sounded in a kitchen where salt glittered on the window like frost. For a while, the repetition was harmless. It parroted laughter and sighs, Manny's chorus to a song he only knew the hook of, Tori's snort when she read local news headlines aloud. Then, in the scene before dawn, I heard my father say my name from the bottom of the stairs in the voice he used when he was trying not to cry. I hadn't spoken to him in months. I hadn't said his name into that dark. I got up so fast I knocked a glass from the counter and the shatter got everyone moving. We stood at the door like people at the edge of a pool, waiting for something to ripple. Nothing did. The house smelled like pennies and wet rope. Arguments came next, but not the ones we had. In real life, we fought about dishes and Manny's boots shedding refinery dust like gray snow. The stairwell chose fights we hadn't lived. 2 a.m. Leah's calm voice from the dark saying, "I know about the pills you stole." There were no pills. There were no thefts. Tori sat up so fast her phone clattered. We stared at one another like the house had fired a starting pistol we didn't know we were holding. Another night, it was my voice telling Tori that Manny had asked me to keep secrets for him. Words I'd never said. A situation that wasn't ours. And yet the way she looked at me was suddenly different. As if the possibility arrived dressed as memory. We tried rules. No talking near the stairs after sundown. Keep music low. Laugh outside, whisper inside. The house obeyed nothing. It began repeating things none of us had said aloud. Tori's voice asking Manny if he'd gone back to her apartment last week. The her not named. Manny's voice saying he never wanted this house, this city, this version of himself. My voice late one night, confessing I'd moved to Texas because it was the furthest I could afford for my father. I'd never told anyone that. I tasted copper when I heard it, like a coin pressed to the back of my tongue. We called the landlord and asked about ducts, vents, crawl spaces where kids could prank us. He said the basement had been for shrimping gear when the place belonged to a fisherman. He said storms had warped the walls, the concrete was salt-sick. Don't lean on it. Sound does tricks down there, he said. It'll hold on to you if you let it. Then he laughed like he'd meant to be charming. Tori hung a little brass bell on the doorknob, a tourist shop charm she swore would ring if anyone opened it from below. The bell made a gentle, gull-bright sound when the door moved. We told ourselves we'd sleep better. The pump grew irregular, coughing awake even when it hadn't rained. We'd hear a slow glug and then the voices would begin, crisp as ice, timed to the machine's breath. The house started stitching the repetitions into little plays, snatches of us braided with new lines we didn't recognize. Leah apologized in the stairwell for talking to it. At 3:07 it murmured back in her voice and Manny's and mine overlapping, "You're welcome." The sound felt like cold fingers sliding under a shirt. I slept badly and dreamed of a flooded theater where the audience was made of mirrors. Manny said it had to be a speaker, a prank, an app. He prowled the rooms at 1 in the morning with a flashlight, and the careful anger of a man trying not to think of other explanations. He didn't find anything but a loose vent cover and a dead green lizard curled like punctuation. 2 nights later, he came home early, red-eyed from refinery light. He slammed his boots down and said, not asking, "Who told you?" Tori said, "Told me what?" He said he'd heard an argument played at 2 a.m. Our voices, the script of a breakup that hadn't happened yet. "I didn't dream it," he said. "I heard it rehearsed." The word rehearsed made something drop inside me, the way elevators pretend to fall when they start. The last week blurred. The bell developed a halo of fingerprints. Leah started keeping her shoes by the bed. Tori bought bleach and mopped the kitchen twice a day as if cleanness could erase a voice. I caught myself narrating in my head what to say, what not to say, like dressing for a camera nobody had asked to be in. On the final night, after a drizzly afternoon and a sunset the color of old coins, the pump failed. You can hear a silence fail. It's a sudden absence of a thing you were ignoring. We gathered at the top of the stairs because pretending not to care would have been too much theater. The dark felt crowded. "I'm done," I said. "We're leaving." The sentence fit in my mouth like something I'd practiced. In the hush that followed, from below came the sound of 4 sets of footsteps. They climbed slowly, not on wood but through water, as if someone were treading up a flooded stairwell. The brass bell never rang. When the footsteps reached the top, the stairwell spoke in a 5th voice, flat, genderless, as if recorded on a machine older than us, and said, "Say it again." Leah's knees gave and she sat on the floor, both hands pressed to the worry stone like it could grow big enough to hide her. Tori whispered, "Please," but it wasn't a prayer to anything I recognized. Nothing moved. In the water below, our reflections shifted and I saw our faces, and behind them another, dull as a mask, open-mouthed like the basement door. We ran. The bell chimed once, a cheap bright note, not because anything opened but because my wrist clipped it on the way by. We threw clothes into trash bags and got in cars while the sky still had the bruised look of night. I drove until the gulls stopped sounding like drunks and started sounding like birds again. By noon, the landlord had called it flood damage, act of God on a form we didn't argue with. We spread across town like people after a small war. Sometimes making coffee, I pause and listen for the push of a pump that isn't there. People think the horror is that the house talked. That's not it. The horror is that it didn't have to lie much. It borrowed us, edited lightly, and played the cut we were on our way to making. Maybe it wanted company. Maybe it wanted a script with no ad-libbing. Some nights when the air tastes like metal and wet rope, I wake at 3:07 and lie still as a held breath, waiting to hear my life come back to me from below, cleaned up, tightened, ready for the final line I haven't spoken yet.